Yeah, so my name is Jacob van Etten. I work for an organization that's called the Alliance of Bioversity International and CIAT. That's kind of a fusion organization that will get a nicer name in the near future, and that is part of the CGIAR consortium of international agricultural research institutes. That is so we are headquartered in Rome. The CGIAR is headquartered in Montpellier. But we work mainly in what we call the global south, so Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And the examples that I will show are mainly from tropical countries. And the goal of the presentation is to see how can this be made relevant for organic variety testing in the European context. So we've been working on an approach that looks at citizen science as a way to do variety testing especially with breeding programs in tropical countries, because we detected quite a number of issues with on-farm testing. So usually on-farm testing is done with different methodologies, but usually it involves these larger fields. For example, there's a format called mother-baby trials, which is large plots, common plots, where you bring farmers to see the varieties, and farmers also take away their baby plot, so they get a kind of a little satellite with 2-3 varieties. It's very difficult to find those larger plots in the communities. There's a lot of logistics involved. It's even more challenging than in Europe, where it's already challenging as well, as Pierre made very clear. Complex layouts, you need to travel there, bad roads, you need complex layouts. Then there's a lot of supervision and training involved, so you need people that are trained in these methods. Pierre has already explained some of these issues. For the European context, we have exactly the same issues in tropical countries, but maybe squared, basically. Many of these formats are also very difficult to execute and understand for farmers themselves. So you need to explain what is going on, which makes it less, they appropriate, so to say, the trials less when you have to explain a lot. Why are you doing replication, or why are you designing the plot in such a way? Data collection generally requires timely visits, and generally the data return, if you really look at it, it's quite low and also slow. So many times it's long after the season is when you really get the data on paper, and then you have a fair percentage of the data is lost due to all sorts of reasons. Then also many trials have a fair low number of plots. So and we think about 20 plots as a very low number, or 30, 40 plots is low. If you compare that with, say, the management, the kind of trials that large companies do, which involves hundreds or thousands of plots to validate varieties. And also management is unrepresentative. So it's much too good most of the time. They do things like managed drought, which means that if the drought is too bad, you irrigate a little bit. Fertilization is usually much higher than what farmers usually can afford. And that, of course, has good statistical reasons, reducing variance, but it also leads to a low external validity. How can you solve this? Well, incrementing sample sizes, of course, is a way to do that. What we thought would be a very interesting way to look at it and to really completely rethink how on-farm trialing is being done is to look at how citizen science is being done. So mainly in ecology, but also in other fields. Bird research especially has a long tradition of citizen science, of people doing bird watching, recording observations, sending it to scientists. It goes into huge databases, and like important scientific publications are based on data that's actually not collected by scientists but by volunteers. Actually, the majority of research published on bird ecology and migration is based on data collected by volunteers. On the right, you see one on climate by NASA. So that's also not a bad institute. from a research perspective. And what is interesting there is also the price tag. So people pay money to participate in these experiments. So in some way, people that organize citizen science trials are also able to motivate farmers in a very different way to work with them. So that we found it quite inspiring. So rethinking, we came up with these kinds of ideas. We wanted to put variety evaluation really in the hands of farmers. So really empower them as much as possible to execute the trials by themselves. Motivate them as citizen scientists, so when they feel involved, they appropriate the trials. They really feel it's their own little test, and that inverts incentives. So it's not us chasing farmers, but it's actually farmers chasing us, or participating as equal researchers or citizen scientists. Then making it simple, so really going to very simple designs, and I will show you how we've done that, because that requires very little supervision and training. And there are a number of other reasons, but that's the main reason is this one, the logistical part of it. Then the fourth one is to go digital. So many of these citizen science projects that are successful, like bird watching, it's all based on use of mobile phones. It's a really crucial part of it. That has many benefits. So reducing errors, reducing staff needs, but also the how quick the feedback is. So how quick the data comes to us and how quick we can then send back reports to farmers, to keep the relationship dynamic and not wait for like months to be able to send back analysis. Rethink the statistics. So instead of so what we think, like historically, if you look at it, how a lot of the participatory work that we do is based on statistics that come out of the breeding tradition, say Ronald Fisher basically, and then we bring it to the farming. We add some water to the wine to make it fit farm conditions. What if you work the other way around? You say, what are farmers able to observe and to do, and how can we then adapt the statistical methods to that to analyze those data? So what you will see is quite different from, say, traditional statistics used in plant breeding. And then analyzing G by E, very important, the link between crop performance and the environment and crop management, and do that as explicit as possible. So this is the kind of thing that we came up with. So one single approach, not a whole suite of approaches, because we need to be able to scale this across countries, many farmers, many different crops. So we've divided, we settled on one approach, and these are the kind of the basic characteristics. So one is to use farms as incomplete blocks and very small ones. So we settled on the number of 3 as the number of varieties that we put in incomplete blocks. So we may be testing maybe 10, 20 varieties, but each farmer gets only 3. Later on, I'll explain a little bit more. We use ranking as the main approach for data collection. You can use many types of approaches for data collection in these trials, but ranking is the basic one and the most simple one. So, and the kind of the minimalistic approach to this. So as long as a farmer can rank the varieties, we are okay. We do blind testing. We don't reveal the names of the varieties to farmers until the end of the trial. We use a digital platform to streamline the whole process. It goes all the way, it says data collection, but it's actually before it. The experimental design is done on the platform, then the data collection and analysis. That allows us to give this very quick feedback to farmers, because the data that comes in is already clean, and we know the variable names, so we can run the analysis very quickly. Just click on a button and the reports are being generated. And we embrace variation in environment and crop management. So we don't tell farmers plant on such and such a date, on such and such a soil, or such and such crop management. We observe these things. The only thing that we really control is the varieties that go in, and all the rest is up to the farmer, unless there's a very specific hypothesis that we want to test about the combination of varieties plus a type of management. So we don't minimize G by E, which is usually the goal in many experimental designs, and then to isolate the genotypic effect. We also look at G by E as a positive thing. So if there's a positive G by E interaction, it's not necessarily bad. So we call this method the triadic comparison of technologies, or tricot or tricot in French. So you have a nice name. You can simply refer to it as with that name. So this is to explain a little bit more the experimental design, if you're not familiar with incomplete blocks. So basically you randomly assign these varieties to farmers, and we label them A, B, C, keep it very simple. And we randomize in many different ways. So the ABC one, in one farm, a variety can be an A, in another farm it's a B. So it's randomized in terms of the order. It's also randomized sequentially. So we hand out packages. So if we go to community and we hand out packages with consecutive numbers, that will be balanced so that each village, for example, receives the same number of varieties. So we can do it very flexibly. We can implement these kinds of trials. This is how it would look like incomplete blocks. We developed formats to explain the trial to farmers and to be able to very quickly explain this to workers in NGOs, for example, who are not agronomists, how to run these types of trials. It has to be very simple to be able to do that, because you need to repeat it many, many times, these kinds of trainings. So it's very brief. It's basically you receive the package and you grow it out. This is a nice example of a bean field with the 3 varieties that farmers then compare. This is in Honduras. And then also we looked at the statistics that are available to analyze these kinds of data. And we found an interesting model called the Plackett-Luce model, and that was not properly implemented in software, so we re-implemented it in R. So it's available as an open source software. And what it does, it kind of takes all these rankings together. So farmers indicate which is the variety that they find worst and best, for example, for a certain trait, for yields, or also for the overall performance, which is not only about yield, but also about other agronomic aspects taken together by the farmer. And the model, what it does, it kind of then puts the general picture back again. It puts Humpty Dumpty back again. So if you see on the left, actually all the farmers agree with the order that you have on the right, and that A is better than C, C is better than D, and D is better than G. But they also only one kind of bit of the elephant, and we put together the big picture with this model. So we did some tests to see how accurate farmers are with very minimal training on different aspects. So plant vigor, plant architecture, pest resistance, and disease resistance in this case for common bean. And we found that they're much, much better than random. That's one. So we measured here the differences with what an expert would say. If they had no differences, then you would have in the blue bar, if they have one switch in the order, so if the order was A, B, C, and they switched A and B, for example, so it becomes B, A, C, then they would be in the orange bar. So the random null model on the right, you would expect that most would have 1 or 2 changes, and in reality, most of them have no difference with the expert or only 1 difference. And if you then analyze it statistically, in all the cases, the consensus between the farmers, so there's a group of farmers, if you calculate the consensus between them, it was exactly the same answer as what the expert had given. So that gave us kind of a lot of confidence in working with these methods, because that's the idea of the citizen science. So you get data that's relatively noisy, but where you can retrieve the consensus which could be very accurate. Because we get all these diverse points of view, we can have confidence and independent. So they're independent, so farmers don't talk to each other. That's also very important. That means that the final answer is quite good. And we've seen it in many different trials again. Then the other element of this is this environmental analysis of the trials. So this is an example also of common bean in Nicaragua, neighboring to Honduras. What we did here was to plant trials with farmers during 5 seasons, and with across all the 5 seasons we had 800 plots in total. So every season had 200 plots on average. Then we analyzed those data so we connected the data to environmental data. So we, with the GPS points of each of the plots and the planting date, we retrieved data from climatic databases and calculated a lot of kind of agroclimatic variables. So you can calculate a lot of different things, such as the number of days with below a certain threshold temperature, or the number of days without rain. Consecutive number of days without rain is an important one. All kinds of other things like the number of days above a certain temperature threshold. We then analyzed the data to see which of these variables influenced farmers' opinions about the varieties, and that led to this result. Also, we did a cross-validation, so we predicted one season with the results of the 4 other seasons, because we have 5 seasons we could do this, and we looked at the variables that really predicted across seasons. So if it only predicts within that year, it may be because of the special conditions of that year. If it also predicts then the performance outside of that particular season, the relationship between the environmental variable that influences the performance of the varieties is much more robust, because it works across years. By doing this, we identified one variable that really stuck out from the rest of the varieties, and that's the one on the top. It's maximum night temperature. And in common bean, that's exactly one of the variables that is important in determining heat stress. So above 19 degrees, in this case 18.7 degrees, beans start to experience heat stress. And this is also in the physiology textbooks for common bean. That's the kind of the number around 19, 20 degrees night temperature. The heat stress kind of kicks in. And what you see is that the model kind of splits all the plots in 2 sets. So you have a little bit over 500 plots on the left with cool conditions, and 341 plots on the right with hot conditions above 18.7 degrees Celsius. And the variety performance is different. So what you see on the x-axis is the probability of each of the varieties of beating all the other varieties. So winning, being number 1, basically. So the best variety in the cool season is actually the local variety, which has about 15% probability of beating all the other one. But then if it becomes hot, if you move to the right, you see that it no longer is the winning variety, but there's another variety that's called Inta Fuerte Sequia, starts to stick out, and has the highest probability of winning in the right panel. That is actually a variety that is known, that's bred for heat stress tolerance. So when we show this to the bean breeders, they could easily explain all the results that we found in this trial. So that gave us quite a bit of confidence in the kind of the accuracy of farmers, not only of reporting their results, but also the ability to then identify genotype by environment interactions in a very explicit way. So with the actual variables that influence G by E, not just as year and or season and location effects, which don't tell us so much as this. Because in this case, for example, in Ethiopia, we identified cold tolerance as a very important one in durum wheat, for example, and the breeders were not aware of that, which really led to a new insight for them and a new breeding goal. So that was very interesting. Then the other thing that we can do with these kinds of results is then to start recommending varieties, to do all the sorts of analysis with long-term climate data. So we used 15 years of climate data to predict what is the best variety for each of these places, and we can start to build up very detailed pictures of of variety adaptation across space, even in places where we haven't really sampled, so farms that are not covered by our trial, but where we know what the climate is, because we do have the climate data from different data sets. And here you can see that the pattern is quite complicated. This is a hilly area. We also have coffee growing, so it's a lot of differences in altitude. You can see that you can make the variety recommendations very specific. The other thing that we try to do is to really, so this is a very different way of doing things from what breeders have been doing and many on-farm trials have operated. So we've tried to document a lot of this and to write scientific publications to show that this works and that the statistics are work well and so on. So here you see some of our applications. And we've been able to collaborate with a lot of organizations to implement this. So we started working mainly on common bean in Central America, across 5 countries, durum wheat in Ethiopia, and in India with bread wheat and rice. And then later on we had different projects. So we're working on a project with cocoa, a tree crop, quite challenging in Ghana, many crops in Ethiopia, in India, Uganda, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, Rwanda. A lot of work going on in Rwanda right now. Seed-linked, Nico is in the call. We work with Nico as well. It's a little bit different in terms that Nico built his own platform, but inspired by our methods, and that could be interesting to talk about also a little bit later during the discussion. And also we've been entering into consumer testing, because this is also a method that is very similar to things that are used in food science, the worst best type of testing. And they've been, so SIP is the International Potato Center, has been using the platform also for sweet potato consumer testing in Uganda and Ghana with very interesting results. So this is a little view of the digital platform that is behind all of this. It's called Clim Mob, and it allows the user to really go from the start to the end of the experimental cycle. Because it's so simple in a way, very few choices to make in terms of the design, etc. It makes it possible for, say, NGOs, farm organizations, etc., to be quite active in organizing the trials themselves. So you can assign field agents. You can choose your what we call technology options, because you can do it for varieties, but also for other things. You register farmers, and then you start to collect data, and then you can monitor the progress as well, what you see on the right. So you can even see which person is on track with collecting the data, etc. You can, at all points, you can look at the data, you can download it, etc. This is the process that is behind the platform. So it goes, you create your project, you create your experimental design, then you prepare your packages, you register the participants. We do that with QR codes that the platform produces, so that minimizes also any errors. Collect data, and then very quickly you can generate your reports. And each of these steps is kind of supported by different digital products. So the QR codes, your randomization as an Excel spreadsheet, and then data collection forms. We use something called Open Data Kit, which is a way to collect data on Android devices. We're working on a number of other channels, including SMS and WhatsApp. And then at the end, you can you get your data analysis report back in different formats. So there's an HTML format, like a website format, and then a Word format, and then also info sheets for participants. You get kind of a 2-pager, and with the basic information for each of the farmers that you can then very quickly go back with to the farms and organize discussion groups, etc. So in synthesis, and we can discuss it a bit more, what we think is the main contribution of this is that we've kind of streamlined the digital process to do on-farm testing of varieties. That allows us to involve many farmers, so do 800 plots, but also many more. So we've done trials with up to 8,000 plots, for example, in India, very big country, without overloading farmers and with the ability to actually devolve a lot of this work to community organizations, farm organizations, NGOs, and so on. We think we achieve a higher external validity by this, by giving less instructions to farmers. So farmers put it in all their different production systems. And that gives us also more insight into G by E and the explicit variables, so on the environmental side. So we knew with the beans really that it was heat tolerance and not something else that caused these differences. We've been able to do this with fairly low technical requirements. So Android phones, which almost every extension agent owns. And which then is easy to expand. So making things more complex, we find very easy. Simplifying things has been the challenge as well. And then we also think, and that's maybe interesting for the discussion, that this could give rise to different business models in variety testing. So farmers could organize themselves and start testing different varieties for themselves, and organize themselves in input purchasing, for example, as cooperatives, or and that's Nico's example, seed linked with a kind of a platform model, and kind of an eBay for seeds that is also including variety testing. So we're not ready yet. So we have found a new way to do variety testing, but there's a lot to think about different ways to embed this into organizations. So that was my final slide. Now it's back